I watched my son Alex through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Denver General's pediatric wing, his small body motionless in the hospital bed where he'd spent the last 8 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 7 years old, he should have been running through our penthouse apartment, leaving toy cars scattered across marble floors, but instead he lay perfectly still, connected to machines that beeped rhythmically like some cruel metronome counting down moments I couldn't get back. The doctors had explained his condition in clinical terms that felt like foreign languages: complete spinal cord injury at the C4 level, resulting in quadriplegia with minimal hope for recovery. What they couldn't explain was how a father was supposed to watch his child's spirit slowly fade away while his body remained trapped in stillness. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'd built Morrison Tech from nothing into a billion-dollar empire, conquering markets across 3 continents before my 40th birthday. I could negotiate with venture capitalists in Tokyo, close deals with government contractors in Washington, and restructure entire corporations with a single conference call. But I couldn't make my son move his fingers. I couldn't bring back the laughter that used to echo through our home, or the way Alex used to sprint toward me when I came home from business trips, his arms stretched wide for hugs that felt like the only victories that truly mattered. Money had always been my solution to problems: better doctors, experimental treatments, private facilities with cutting-edge technology. I'd spend millions trying to buy my son's recovery, flying specialists in from Switzerland, and funding research projects that promised breakthroughs just around the corner. Yet Alex remained silent and still, his bright green eyes staring at ceiling tiles that held no answers. The accident had happened on a Tuesday morning in March, when Alex was riding his bicycle in our private courtyard while I took an emergency call from Beijing. A construction truck delivering materials for our neighbor's renovation had backed into the narrow space, the driver unable to see the small boy who had wandered too close to investigate the interesting machinery. The impact lasted seconds, but it shattered our lives completely. My ex-wife Sarah had blamed me immediately, and probably correctly. I'd been distracted by business when I should have been watching our son. She'd moved back to California within weeks of Alex's diagnosis, unable to bear seeing him in his current state, leaving me to navigate this nightmare alone while managing a company that required constant attention and decision-making. The neurologist's office felt like a courtroom where I was perpetually on trial for crimes I couldn't understand. Dr. Patricia Wells had been Alex's primary physician since the accident, a woman whose compassion was evident but whose prognosis remained brutally honest. She reviewed his latest scans with the detached professionalism that medical training demanded, pointing to images that showed the devastating interruption in his spinal cord, the place where signals from his brain could no longer reach the rest of his body. Physical therapy had yielded minimal results: occasional muscle spasms that gave false hope, reflexive movements that meant nothing in terms of voluntary control. Alex could breathe on his own and move his head slightly, but everything below his shoulders remained unresponsive to his will or mine. The worst part wasn't the medical complexity, or even the financial drain that would have bankrupted most families. The worst part was watching my son disappear into himself, becoming a silent observer of a world he could no longer fully participate in. He'd stopped speaking weeks ago, stopped responding to my attempts at conversation or entertainment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The vibrant child who once peppered me with endless questions about how computers worked and why planes could fly had been replaced by someone who seemed to be waiting for something I couldn't identify or provide. I'd hired the best child psychologists in Colorado, brought in specialists who understood trauma and adjustment disorders, but Alex remained locked in silence that felt more impenetrable than his physical paralysis. The elevator hummed softly as it descended to the hospital's main lobby, carrying me away from another fruitless visit with Alex. I'd spent 3 hours reading to him from books he used to love, showing him videos of dogs playing in parks, even bringing in a tablet loaded with his favorite animated movies. Nothing had sparked even the faintest glimmer of interest in his eyes. The pediatric wing had become my second office, where I conducted conference calls from uncomfortable chairs and reviewed quarterly reports while monitoring machines that tracked my son's vital signs with mechanical precision. My assistant Jennifer had rearranged my entire schedule around hospital visits, moving board meetings to accommodate therapy sessions that yielded no progress, postponing international trips indefinitely while Alex remained trapped in his motionless existence. The main lobby of Denver General buzzed with the controlled chaos that characterized large medical facilities. Families rushing toward elevators, medical staff moving purposefully between departments, visitors clutching flowers and balloons that seemed inadequate gestures against the weight of serious illness. I was checking my phone for messages from the Tokyo office when I heard something that stopped me completely. A melody drifted through the ambient noise, simple and pure, whistled with the kind of casual skill that suggested years of practice. The tune was hauntingly familiar, though I couldn't immediately place where I'd heard it before. It seemed to cut through the hospital's sterile atmosphere, like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, carrying with it a warmth that felt almost foreign in this environment of medical procedures and clinical assessments. I followed the sound toward the hospital's cafe area, where a man in his early 30s sat at a corner table with a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He was wearing the navy blue uniform of Morrison Tech's cleaning service, the company logo embroidered on his shirt pocket, though I didn't recognize him from the corporate headquarters. His daughter sat across from him, working on homework while occasionally looking up to smile at his gentle whistling. The melody continued, weaving through conversations and announcements, creating a pocket of tranquility that seemed to exist independent of the surrounding medical urgency. There was something about the man's presence that commanded attention without demanding it. A quiet confidence that spoke of inner strength rather than external achievement. The little girl looked up from her math workbook and joined in with the whistling, harmonizing with her father's melody in a way that suggested this was a familiar ritual between them. Their synchronization was perfect, creating a duet that felt both spontaneous and practiced, like a secret language they'd developed together over years of shared moments. Other people in the cafe had noticed too. Conversations quieted slightly as the music washed over them, providing a brief respite from whatever medical concerns had brought them to the hospital. An elderly woman waiting near the pharmacy closed her eyes and smiled. A young mother rocking a fussy baby found her child calming to the gentle tune. Even the harried medical staff seemed to slow their pace slightly, allowing themselves a moment of peace amid their demanding schedules. I found myself moving closer, drawn by curiosity about this man who could create such immediate calm in a place where anxiety and worry were constant companions. His name tag read Ryan Martinez, and his hands bore the calluses and minor scars that spoke of physical work, though his attention to his daughter revealed a gentleness that contradicted any assumptions about manual laborers being rough or uncaring. When he finished whistling, he helped her with a particularly challenging math problem, explaining multiplication concepts with patience that many professional educators would have envied. His teaching style was intuitive and encouraging, celebrating small victories and offering support through difficulties without judgment or frustration. "That song," I said, approaching their table with uncharacteristic hesitation. In boardrooms and conference halls, I commanded attention and respect, but something about this man's quiet dignity made me feel like an intruder in a private moment. "I've heard it before, but I can't remember where." Ryan looked up with brown eyes that held depths of experience I couldn't immediately interpret. His smile was genuine but cautious, the expression of someone who'd learned to be polite to strangers while protecting his family from unwanted attention. "It's an old folk song my grandmother taught me," he said, his voice carrying traces of an accent that suggested Hispanic heritage. "She used to say music could heal things that medicine couldn't touch." His daughter, Mia, looked at me with the frank curiosity that characterized children her age, assessing whether I posed any threat to her father or their peaceful afternoon together. "Your daughter has a beautiful voice," I said, attempting to make conversation while trying to understand why this chance encounter felt so significant. Mia beamed at the compliment, showing missing front teeth that made her smile even more endearing. She was clearly comfortable with strangers, suggesting that Ryan had raised her with confidence rather than fear, teaching her to be appropriately cautious without becoming suspicious or withdrawn. "She gets that from her mother," Ryan replied, and something in his tone suggested a story of loss that echoed my own recent experiences with family dissolution. "Music was always important in our house, still is, even though it's just the two of us now." He gathered Mia's homework materials with practiced efficiency, clearly preparing to leave, but I found myself reluctant to let this connection end so quickly. "Do you work for Morrison Tech?" I asked, recognizing the logo on his uniform but unable to place him among the hundreds of employees who kept the corporate headquarters functioning smoothly. "I'm Jake Morrison, the CEO. I don't think we've met formally." Ryan's expression shifted slightly, recognition mixing with surprise and what might have been concern about speaking so casually with someone so far above his position in the company hierarchy. "Yes, sir, I work the night cleaning crew in the executive floors. Third shift mostly, so we probably wouldn't have crossed paths during normal business hours." His voice became more formal, the easy warmth he'd shown with his daughter replaced by professional courtesy that felt like a barrier between us. "Please, just Jake," I said, sitting down across from them without invitation, driven by an impulse I couldn't fully explain. "That song you were whistling, would you mind sharing it again? There's something about it that feels familiar, like a memory I can't quite reach." I thought about Alex lying motionless upstairs, about the silence that had replaced his laughter, about my desperate search for anything that might reach through the walls he'd built around himself since the accident. Ryan exchanged a glance with Mia, some silent communication passing between them before he nodded and began whistling again. This time I listened more carefully, trying to identify what made the melody so compelling. It wasn't complex or sophisticated like the classical pieces I'd grown up with in my privileged household, but it possessed an emotional honesty that felt more powerful than technical perfection. The tune seemed to tell a story without words, expressing hope and sadness and resilience in equal measure, creating a narrative that spoke directly to experiences that couldn't be adequately captured in language. As Ryan whistled, Mia began humming along, and I found myself thinking about Alex's love for music before the accident. He'd been learning piano, showing natural talent that his instructor had praised enthusiastically, and our penthouse had often echoed with his enthusiastic practice sessions and improvised compositions. Since the accident, silence had replaced music in our home, broken only by medical equipment and my increasingly tense phone conversations with doctors, lawyers, and business associates. I'd removed the piano from the living room because seeing it reminded me too painfully of everything Alex had lost, everything we'd lost together as a family. "That's beautiful," I said when they finished, and I realized I meant it more deeply than most compliments I'd offered in recent months. "Where did you learn to whistle like that?" The question felt inadequate, but I was struggling to find words for the impact their simple music had made on my afternoon, the way it had momentarily lifted the weight of worry and helplessness that had become my constant companions. "My grandmother taught me when I was about Mia's age," Ryan explained, his formal tone softening as he spoke about family history. "She said whistling was the most democratic form of music. Anyone could do it. It didn't require expensive instruments or formal training, and it could bring comfort in situations where nothing else would help. During hard times, she'd whistle to keep everyone's spirits up, to remind us that beauty still existed even when everything else seemed broken." His words resonated with experiences I was still processing, the way tragedy could make simple pleasures feel both more precious and more painful. "Did it work?" I asked, genuinely curious about whether music had provided the healing his grandmother had promised, whether there was hope for reaching Alex through melodies that medicine couldn't deliver. "Sometimes," Ryan answered honestly, gathering his daughter's backpack and helping her into her jacket. "It didn't fix everything, but it helped us remember who we were before the problem started, and who we could be again when things got better. Music has a way of connecting us to parts of ourselves that get buried under worry and fear." As they prepared to leave, I felt an unexpected reluctance to return to my solitary vigil upstairs, to the silent room where Alex lay surrounded by machines that monitored his condition but couldn't restore his spirit. "Would you mind if I walked with you to the parking garage?" I asked, surprising myself with the request. "I'd like to hear more about your grandmother's philosophy of music, if you don't mind sharing." 3 weeks had passed since my encounter with Ryan and Mia in the hospital cafe, and I found myself thinking about their conversation more often than seemed reasonable for a chance meeting with an employee. The melody Ryan had whistled lingered in my mind during board meetings and conference calls, surfacing at unexpected moments when I was reviewing financial reports or negotiating contracts with overseas partners. I'd begun visiting Alex more frequently, hoping that somehow the memory of their music might translate into inspiration for reaching my son, but his condition remained unchanged. The medical team continued their routine assessments, physical therapy sessions yielded no measurable improvement, and Alex's silence had deepened into something that felt increasingly impenetrable. Dr. Wells had suggested we consider alternative approaches to traditional rehabilitation, mentioning music therapy programs that some pediatric facilities had implemented with varying degrees of success. The concept seemed almost frivolous compared to the cutting-edge medical treatments I'd been pursuing, but my desperation was reaching levels that made even unconventional options worth exploring. When I mentioned Ryan's name to the hospital administration, requesting information about how to contact him directly, I learned that he'd actually completed certification in music therapy before taking the cleaning position at Morrison Tech. Financial circumstances had forced him to accept work that provided immediate income rather than pursuing his therapeutic training, but his background explained the confident way he'd discussed music's healing potential. I arranged to meet Ryan after his shift ended, catching him in the corporate parking garage as he prepared to pick up Mia from her after-school program. The conversation was awkward initially, with both of us navigating the unusual dynamics of a CEO seeking personal advice from someone who cleaned his offices during overnight hours. Ryan listened carefully as I explained Alex's situation, his expression shifting from polite attention to genuine concern as he understood the depth of my son's withdrawal from the world around him. When I asked whether he thought music therapy might help reach a child who had stopped responding to conventional approaches, his answer was thoughtful rather than immediately optimistic. "Music works differently for everyone," he said, leaning against his 15-year-old Honda Civic while choosing his words carefully. "It's not magic, and it can't fix physical damage that's already been done, but sometimes it can reach parts of a person that have shut down to protect themselves from pain. Children especially seem to respond to melodies that remind them of feeling safe and connected." He paused, studying my face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading emotional undercurrents that others might miss. "The question isn't whether music can help your son move again. That's a medical issue beyond what any therapy can address. The question is whether it might help him want to engage with life again, to find reasons for trying even when his body can't do what his mind remembers." His honesty was both refreshing and challenging after months of medical professionals who offered guarded optimism without promising specific outcomes. "Would you be willing to try working with Alex?" I asked, the request feeling both natural and completely unprecedented in my experience of business relationships. "I could arrange for you to have official access as a consultant, and obviously we'd discuss appropriate compensation for your time and expertise." Ryan's response surprised me with its immediate concern for practical considerations rather than excitement about potential financial benefits. "I'd need to bring Mia with me sometimes," he said. "My childcare options are limited, and I won't compromise her routine for additional work commitments, even ones that might help another child." His protective instincts reminded me of my own fierce devotion to Alex before the accident, when I'd rearranged international travel schedules to attend school performances and birthday parties that seemed monumentally important at the time. "That wouldn't be a problem," I assured him, though I hadn't considered how Mia's presence might affect Alex or the therapy sessions. "Actually, it might be beneficial. Alex hasn't interacted with other children since the accident, and isolation is becoming as much of a concern as his physical limitations." The idea of my son engaging with a peer felt simultaneously hopeful and terrifying. Hope because any social connection would represent progress, terrifying because witnessing his inability to play normally might deepen his depression further. We arranged for Ryan to meet Alex the following afternoon during the window between physical therapy and dinner when he was typically most alert. I spent the morning second-guessing my decision, wondering whether I was grasping at increasingly desperate solutions rather than accepting the reality of Alex's condition. My ex-wife Sarah had been critical of what she called my refusal to accept medical facts, arguing that I was subjecting our son to false hope and unnecessary emotional strain by continuing to pursue treatments that couldn't restore his physical function. Her criticism stung partly because it contained elements of truth. I had been struggling to accept limitations that felt incompatible with my lifelong belief that sufficient resources and determination could overcome any obstacle. The first session was scheduled for Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and I arrived early to prepare Alex for meeting someone new. He listened without response as I explained that a friend would be visiting, someone who wanted to share music that had helped other children feel better during difficult times. Alex's eyes tracked my movements around the room, but he offered no verbal reaction or facial expression that might indicate interest or concern about the upcoming encounter. His passive acceptance of whatever happened to him had become more painful to witness than active resistance would have been, suggesting a level of emotional withdrawal that worried his psychological care team increasingly. Ryan arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Mia, who carried a small keyboard and the same worn notebook she'd had at the hospital cafe. His approach to Alex was masterful in its restraint. He didn't overwhelm my son with excessive enthusiasm or false cheerfulness, but instead introduced himself quietly and asked permission before sitting down near the hospital bed. Mia followed her father's lead, settling into a chair where Alex could see her without feeling crowded or observed too intensely. Their presence transformed the room's atmosphere immediately, replacing clinical sterility with warmth that felt almost tangible. "Alex, I'm Ryan, and this is my daughter Mia," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle confidence I'd noticed during our first meeting. "Your dad mentioned that you used to play piano before your accident. Mia and I love making music together, and we thought maybe you'd like to hear some of our favorite songs." He waited for any response from Alex, but when none came, he simply nodded to Mia, who began playing a simple melody on the portable keyboard. The song was different from the one Ryan had whistled in the hospital cafe, but it carried the same emotional depth, the same ability to communicate feelings that words couldn't adequately express. As Mia played, Ryan began whistling harmony, creating a musical conversation between father and daughter that felt intimate without being exclusive. They weren't performing for Alex or trying to impress him with technical skill. They were simply sharing something they loved, inviting him to participate as much or as little as he felt comfortable. I watched Alex's face carefully, searching for any sign that the music was reaching him through the walls he'd constructed around himself. For the first few minutes, his expression remained unchanged, the same passive acceptance he'd shown toward every therapeutic intervention we'd attempted. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in his eyes. Not excitement or obvious engagement, but a quality of attention that suggested he was actually listening rather than simply enduring another medical procedure disguised as entertainment. When Mia finished the first song, she looked directly at Alex and smiled. "That's one my dad taught me when I was scared about starting school," she said matter-of-factly. "Sometimes music helps me feel braver when things seem really hard or different from what I'm used to." Her words were simple but profound, acknowledging difficulty without dwelling on it, offering connection without demanding immediate reciprocation. Ryan began whistling again, this time the melody I remembered from our first encounter. As the familiar tune filled the hospital room, I noticed Alex's breathing pattern change slightly, becoming deeper and more relaxed than it had been in weeks. His eyes remained fixed on Ryan's face, and for the first time since the accident, my son seemed fully present in the moment rather than lost in internal struggles I couldn't reach or understand. "This song has special meaning in our family," Ryan explained when he finished. "My grandmother used to say it carried prayers for healing. Not necessarily physical healing, but healing of the spirit that helps us find strength even when our bodies are struggling. Would you like to hear it again, Alex?" For a moment, I thought I saw Alex's lips move slightly, as if he was trying to respond but couldn't quite manage to produce sound. The effort was barely visible, but it represented more communication than he'd attempted in months, a crack in the silence that had surrounded him since he'd stopped speaking. Ryan noticed too, his expression showing recognition of the significance, without making Alex feel pressured to perform or repeat the attempt. The session continued for another 30 minutes, with Ryan and Mia sharing different songs while maintaining the same gentle, non-demanding presence that had characterized their introduction. They talked quietly about music theory in terms simple enough for children to understand, explaining how different combinations of notes could express various emotions, how rhythm could affect mood, how harmony created beauty through cooperation between separate voices. Their educational approach was organic and engaging, making complex concepts accessible without condescending to their audience. As they prepared to leave, Mia approached Alex's bed with the confidence of someone accustomed to making friends easily. "I hope we can make music together again soon," she said, placing the small keyboard on his bedside table. "My dad says music is always better when more people share it, and I think you might have songs inside you that we'd love to hear someday." Her words carried no pressure or expectation, simply an invitation to future connection that Alex could accept or decline without disappointing anyone. After they left, I remained in Alex's room, studying his face for signs of the impact their visit might have made. He was staring at the keyboard Mia had left behind, his eyes showing more focus than I'd seen in months. When I asked whether he'd enjoyed meeting Ryan and Mia, he didn't respond verbally, but his gaze shifted briefly to meet mine before returning to the instrument beside his bed. That fleeting moment of eye contact felt like the most meaningful communication we'd shared since the accident, a bridge across the isolation that had separated us for so long. 2 months into the music therapy sessions, I began receiving calls from the Morrison Tech board of directors, expressing concern about my prolonged absences from corporate headquarters. Richard Steinberg, the board's most influential member, and a man who had questioned my leadership style since the company's initial public offering, scheduled a private lunch meeting to discuss what he diplomatically termed work-life balance issues that were affecting my decision-making responsibilities. The conversation took place at Denver's most exclusive private club, where deals worth millions of dollars were routinely negotiated over perfectly prepared salmon and carefully selected wine pairings. Steinberg's approach was methodical and devastating, beginning with expressions of sympathy for my family situation before transitioning into pointed questions about my commitment to shareholder interests. He presented documented evidence of delayed responses to critical emails, missed opportunities with potential international clients, and strategic decisions that had been postponed while I spent increasing amounts of time at the hospital. His concerns weren't entirely unfounded. I had been distracted during important meetings, my attention divided between quarterly projections and Alex's gradual but unmistakable progress with Ryan's musical interventions. "Jake, we all understand that your son's condition is heartbreaking," Steinberg said, his tone suggesting practiced compassion rather than genuine empathy. "But Morrison Tech employs over 3,000 people whose livelihoods depend on strong leadership and sound business judgment. The board is beginning to question whether your personal circumstances are preventing you from fulfilling your fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders and employees." His words carried an implicit threat that resonated with everything I'd learned about corporate governance during my rise to executive leadership. The ultimatum, when it finally came, was delivered with the kind of legal precision that characterized all of Steinberg's professional communications. I could continue pursuing personal interests that distracted from corporate obligations, but any further deterioration in company performance or shareholder confidence would force the board to consider leadership changes that might better serve Morrison Tech's long-term interests. The message was unmistakably clear. Choose between my son's recovery and the business empire I'd spent 15 years building from a small software startup into a multinational technology corporation. That evening, I sat in Alex's hospital room, grappling with a decision that felt impossible to make rationally. Alex had been making remarkable progress during his sessions with Ryan and Mia, not in terms of physical recovery, but in emotional engagement that had surprised everyone on his medical team. He'd begun attempting to hum along with their melodies, his voice barely audible but unmistakably intentional, representing the first voluntary sounds he'd produced since the accident. Dr. Wells had documented improved sleep patterns, decreased anxiety levels, and, most significantly, renewed interest in his surroundings that suggested genuine healing of psychological trauma that had been as debilitating as his physical injuries. Ryan had developed a routine of visiting 3 times per week, sometimes bringing Mia, sometimes working individually with Alex on breathing exercises that incorporated musical phrasing to help him project his voice more effectively. Their relationship had evolved from formal therapy into something approaching friendship, with Alex eagerly anticipating their sessions and showing disappointment when scheduling conflicts prevented their regular meetings. The small keyboard Mia had left during their first visit had become Alex's most treasured possession, positioned where he could see it constantly, even though his paralysis prevented him from playing conventional melodies. The crisis reached its peak during a particularly difficult board meeting where Steinberg presented a comprehensive analysis of my leadership performance over the previous quarter. His presentation included charts showing declining productivity metrics, graphs documenting missed deadlines, and testimonials from department heads who expressed concern about my availability during critical decision-making periods. The evidence was professionally compiled and emotionally devastating, forcing me to confront the reality that my dedication to Alex's recovery had indeed compromised my ability to lead the company effectively. My fellow board members listened with uncomfortable silence as Steinberg outlined a succession plan that would transition leadership responsibilities to my longtime deputy, Marcus Chen, while allowing me to retain a ceremonial position that would preserve my financial interests without requiring daily operational involvement. The proposal was presented as a compassionate solution that would benefit everyone involved. The company would have focused leadership, shareholders would see improved performance, and I would be free to concentrate on family responsibilities without corporate pressure. The vote was scheduled for the following week, giving me time to consider whether I wanted to fight for my position or accept the transition gracefully. As I drove home from that devastating meeting, I found myself taking an unplanned detour to Ryan's neighborhood, a working-class area of Denver, where modest homes and small businesses created a sense of community that felt foreign to someone accustomed to corporate towers and gated residential developments. I parked outside the small music store where Ryan worked part-time during weekends, teaching piano lessons to children whose families couldn't afford formal conservatory training. Through the window, I could see Ryan working with a young boy who was struggling to coordinate his left and right hands during a simple exercise. His teaching approach was patient and encouraging, celebrating small improvements while gently correcting technical mistakes that could become problematic habits if not addressed properly. The scene reminded me of his work with Alex, the same combination of professional competence and genuine caring that had made such a profound difference in my son's emotional recovery. When the lesson ended, I approached Ryan with a request that surprised both of us. I asked whether he would consider leaving his positions at Morrison Tech and the music store to work exclusively with Alex, providing intensive therapy that might accelerate his progress while allowing me to focus more effectively on corporate responsibilities. The offer included compensation significantly higher than his current combined income, plus benefits that would provide financial security for his family while pursuing work that clearly represented his true calling. Ryan's response was immediate and firm. He couldn't accept an arrangement that would make him financially dependent on a single client, regardless of how generous the terms might appear initially. His experience with economic instability had taught him the importance of diversified income sources and professional independence that couldn't be revoked based on changing circumstances or personal conflicts. More importantly, he believed that Alex's progress depended partly on the consistency of their current routine, the predictable schedule that provided stability during a period when everything else in his life felt uncertain. "Alex doesn't need a full-time employee," Ryan explained as we walked through his neighborhood toward the small apartment he shared with Mia. "He needs friends who show up regularly because they care about him, not because they're being paid to care." The moment our relationship becomes primarily financial, it changes the dynamic in ways that might actually slow his progress rather than accelerating it. His insight into therapeutic relationships demonstrated understanding that transcended formal training, wisdom gained through experience with his own daughter's adjustment to single-parent family life. As we reached his building, Mia burst through the front door with the enthusiasm that characterized her approach to most activities. She'd been practicing a new song on her grandmother's old guitar, eager to share her musical discoveries with anyone willing to listen. Her performance was technically imperfect, but emotionally compelling, demonstrating the same natural ability to communicate through melody that made her such an effective partner in Alex's therapy sessions. When she finished, she asked whether I thought Alex might enjoy learning guitar techniques that could be adapted for someone with limited hand mobility. Her question sparked a conversation about adaptive instruments and modified techniques that could allow Alex to participate more actively in music making, despite his physical limitations. Ryan mentioned specialized equipment that had been developed for disabled musicians, keyboards that responded to eye movements or breath control, software that could translate minimal physical input into complex musical arrangements. The possibilities seemed both exciting and overwhelming, representing hope for Alex's continued progress, while requiring investment in technologies that might or might not prove effective for his specific condition. That night, I returned to Alex's hospital room with my mind churning through the competing demands of corporate responsibility and paternal devotion. Alex was awake when I arrived, humming softly along with a melody that Ryan had taught him during their previous session. His voice was stronger than it had been weeks earlier, carrying notes with confidence that suggested renewed connection to parts of himself that had seemed permanently lost after the accident. When he noticed my presence, he stopped humming but continued watching me with eyes that held more awareness and engagement than I'd seen since before the tragedy that had changed our lives forever. For the first time in months, I sat down beside his bed and began talking to him honestly about the challenges I was facing, the impossible choice between professional obligations and personal priorities that was threatening to tear apart everything I'd worked to build. I explained the board's concerns, Steinberg's ultimatum, and my own confusion about how to balance competing responsibilities that both seemed essential to our family's future. Alex listened without responding verbally, but his attention never wavered, suggesting that he understood more about our situation than his silence had led me to believe. When I finished explaining the corporate crisis, Alex surprised me by attempting to whistle the melody that Ryan and Mia had shared during their first visit. His effort was weak and incomplete, interrupted by the breathing difficulties that remained a constant challenge, but the intention was unmistakably clear. He was trying to offer comfort using the same musical language that had reached him during his darkest period of withdrawal, attempting to give back some of the healing that others had provided during his recovery process. 6 months later, the sound of laughter echoed through the renovated wing of Denver General Hospital that now housed the Morrison Family Music Therapy Center. I had made my choice during that pivotal board meeting, stepping down as CEO to establish a nonprofit foundation dedicated to providing music therapy for children with severe medical conditions. The decision had cost me my corporate empire, but it had given me something infinitely more valuable: the opportunity to witness daily miracles that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock valuations. Alex sat in his specialized wheelchair, conducting a small ensemble of young patients as they performed the folk song that Ryan's grandmother had taught him decades earlier. His voice had grown stronger over the months, and while his body remained paralyzed, his spirit had been completely restored through music that connected him to other children facing similar challenges. He had become the center's unofficial ambassador, welcoming new patients with the same gentle confidence that Ryan had shown during their first meeting. Ryan now served as the center's director of music therapy, leading a team of certified therapists who worked with children recovering from traumatic injuries, chronic illnesses, and developmental disabilities. His approach emphasized emotional healing alongside physical rehabilitation, creating an environment where families could find hope, even during the most difficult periods of medical treatment. Mia, now 9 years old, volunteered after school as a peer mentor, teaching younger children that music could express feelings that words couldn't adequately capture. The center had attracted national attention from medical professionals and philanthropists, who recognized the innovative integration of therapeutic music with traditional rehabilitation medicine. Families traveled from across the country seeking treatment that addressed both physical symptoms and psychological trauma, finding in our program a holistic approach that many conventional facilities couldn't provide. The waiting list for admission had grown to over 6 months, but every child who entered our program left with tools for emotional resilience that would serve them throughout their recovery journey. During our weekly staff meeting, Ryan shared updates about recent patient progress while Alex listened from his position near the window overlooking the hospital's healing garden. Their friendship had evolved into something resembling brotherhood, with Alex serving as Ryan's assistant during therapy sessions, and Ryan continuing to challenge Alex with increasingly complex musical arrangements. Together, they had developed techniques for adaptive music making that allowed children with various physical limitations to participate fully in ensemble performances. The transformation in Alex's personality had been remarkable to witness. The withdrawn, silent child who had emerged from his accident had been replaced by someone who radiated joy and compassion, using his own experience with trauma to help other families navigate similar challenges. His wheelchair was equipped with specialized instruments that responded to his head movements and breath control, allowing him to create sophisticated musical compositions that expressed the depth of his emotional recovery. As evening approached, families began gathering in the center's main performance hall for our monthly concert, featuring patient compositions and collaborative pieces. Alex had prepared a special arrangement of his grandmother's folk song, working with Ryan to create harmonies that incorporated instruments adapted for children with various disabilities. The audience included medical staff, family members, and community volunteers who had been touched by stories of healing that transcended traditional medical interventions. When Alex began whistling the opening measures of their signature melody, joined by Ryan's gentle harmonizing and supported by an ensemble of young musicians, the room filled with the same sense of peace and connection that had first captured my attention in the hospital cafe months earlier. The music carried stories of courage, resilience, and the transformative power of human connection that couldn't be diminished by physical limitations or medical diagnoses. I realized that stepping away from corporate success had led me to discover a different kind of achievement: the knowledge that my son's recovery had created opportunities for healing that extended far beyond our family. The melody that had once seemed like a simple folk tune had become an anthem of hope for children who needed reminders that their lives held infinite potential despite temporary challenges. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.